Adrian Vale learned early that silence could be mistaken for strength. From the top floor of his steel and glass tower, the city looked obedient, traffic flowing, lights blinking on cue, everything moving because someone had paid for it to move. Adrian stood with his hands in his pockets, suit jacket still on though the room was warm. He hadn't noticed the temperature in years. Comfort, like affection, was something he registered intellectually, not physically. Billionaire. The word followed him everywhere, heavy and blunt, flattening every other description beneath it. People assumed it meant excess, arrogance, indulgence. What they never guessed was how carefully he rationed emotion, how every feeling passed through a filter of caution before he allowed it to exist. On the desk behind him lay a phone, screen dark, face down. He kept it that way when he was thinking, and he had been thinking a lot lately. About time, about regret, about the strange way memory sharpened instead of fading. 10 years. That was how long he had loved her without a single confession. Adrian didn't call it cowardice. He called it restraint. Back then, his life had been volatile. Hostile takeovers, lawsuits, enemies disguised as partners. He had convinced himself that staying silent was an act of protection. Loving her from a distance felt cleaner, safer. If he never reached for her, he could never drag her into the wreckage. Still, some nights, the quiet felt like punishment. He checked his watch. Another meeting delayed. Another decision postponed. He exhaled slowly, the way his therapist once taught him before Adrian stopped going. Control your breathing, control the outcome. It had worked in every arena except the one that mattered. Across town, in a narrow apartment with mismatched furniture and a window that refused to close all the way, Liana Moore tied her sneakers and braced herself for the day. The morning air smelled like rain and fried oil from the takeaway downstairs. She liked it. It reminded her she lived among people, not above them. Liana's life wasn't impressive on paper, but it was honest. She worked as a patient liaison at a public hospital. Long hours, low pay, endless emotional labor. She was good at it because she listened, because she stayed when others rushed out, because she understood what it meant to feel unseen. At 35, she had learned how to keep moving even when the ground felt unstable. Love, to her, had always been conditional. Temporary. Something you borrowed until the owner wanted it back. She didn't chase it anymore. But there were memories she couldn't fully bury. Sometimes, when she passed a certain street or heard a certain laugh, a familiar ache surfaced, confusing, uninvited. A man who had once looked at her like she mattered, then disappeared without explanation. No goodbye, no closure, just absence. She had stopped asking why years ago. Questions without answers were heavy to carry. Her phone buzzed as she locked the door. Unknown number. She frowned but ignored it, slipping the phone into her bag. Hospitals trained you quickly. Emergencies announced themselves loudly. Everything else could wait. Adrian's driver merged onto the expressway, traffic parting with practiced efficiency. Adrian stared out the window, lost in a memory he didn't intend to visit. Liana's laugh. The way she argued with her whole face. The night he'd almost told her the truth. How the words had burned his throat. How he'd swallowed them back. His phone vibrated. Unknown number. His fingers stilled. For a moment, his pulse betrayed him, hammering harder than any boardroom confrontation ever had. He told himself it was nothing. Telemarketer. Wrong number. The world did not rearrange itself because of coincidence. He declined the call. Yet the unease remained, coiling low in his chest. At the hospital, Liana stood near the nurse's station, reading charts while half listening to a family argue in whispers behind her. Her wrist still bore the faint red mark from a temporary ID band she hadn't removed. She rubbed at it absently, exhaustion tugging at her shoulders. Her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. This time, she felt it. An instinctive tightening, like her body had recognized something her mind hadn't yet caught up to. She stepped into an empty corridor and stared at the screen. She didn't answer. Some doors, once closed, were dangerous to reopen. Night fell. Adrian returned home to his immaculate apartment, poured a drink, and didn't touch it. He picked up the framed photo from his shelf, the only personal object he hadn't replaced with something newer, cleaner. Liana, mid-laugh, unaware of the future, unaware of him. I did this for a reason, he said to no one. The phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't turn it face down. Across the city, Liana sat on her bed, phone in her hands, heart beating louder than the traffic outside. A missed call notification stared back at her, heavy with implication. 10 years ago, silence had ended something without explanation. Tonight, silence was about to do something far worse. If someone who once vanished from your life suddenly reached out again, would you answer, or protect the peace you fought so hard to build? The phone rang again at 9:47 p.m. Not vibrated. Rang. The sound cut through Adrian Vale's penthouse with an urgency that felt almost physical, sharp enough to slice through the careful quiet he'd built around his life. He was standing at the kitchen counter, glass of untouched whiskey sweating onto black marble, when the sound reached him. For a moment, he didn't move. He just stared at the screen lighting up across the room like a flare. Unknown number. His first instinct was irritation. His second was fear. Not the kind that came from risk or loss. He had navigated those waters for decades, but the kind that came from memory. From recognition without proof. From the body remembering something the mind was trying to forget. He crossed the room slowly, as if moving too fast might shatter whatever fragile balance still held. The phone stopped ringing just as his fingers brushed it. Missed call. Adrian exhaled through his nose, a controlled release that didn't quite settle the tension coiled in his chest. He told himself he was being ridiculous. People didn't disappear from your life for 10 years and then return through an anonymous number. Life didn't work that way. And yet, across the city, Liana Moore stood in the hospital corridor outside the ICU. Phone still pressed to her ear though the call had already ended. The line had gone dead before anyone spoke. She stared at the blank screen, her reflection warped in the glass of a nearby window. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't meant to dial the number. Not consciously. Her mother's condition had worsened faster than expected, oxygen levels dropping, doctors speaking in careful half-sentences. In the blur of fear and fatigue, her fingers had moved on instinct, scrolling through contacts she hadn't touched in years. And there it was. Adrian Vale. The name looked foreign and familiar all at once, like a language she used to speak fluently but hadn't practiced. Her thumb hovered. Her heart pounded. She told herself she just needed to hear a voice that once felt steady. Just once. But when the call rang through, panic had seized her. She'd ended it before it could connect, pulse racing as if she'd narrowly avoided something dangerous. Now she wasn't so sure. Adrian stared at the missed call notification longer than necessary. Something about the timing gnawed at him. He checked the call log. No voicemail. No message. Just absence, again. His jaw tightened. 10 years ago, absence had been his choice. He picked up the phone and, against every instinct that had guided him safely through life, pressed redial. The line rang once. Twice. Liana's phone buzzed in her hand, startling her so badly she nearly dropped it. Her breath caught when she saw the incoming call. Unknown number. Her stomach flipped. She knew suddenly. The certainty hit her without logic or explanation, like a memory surfacing from deep water. It's him. She stepped into an empty stairwell, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of disinfectant sharp in her nose. Her finger hovered over the screen. 10 years of unanswered questions pressed in on her from every side. She answered. Hello. Her voice came out softer than she intended. Adrian froze. That single word, one syllable, collapsed a decade. He knew her voice instantly. It had aged, deepened slightly, but the cadence was the same. Warm, grounded, real. His grip tightened on the phone, knuckles whitening. Liana, he said, the name leaving his mouth like a confession. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Silence followed, thick and trembling. So it is you, she said finally, disbelief threaded through the words. I didn't know what I thought. Adrian swallowed. For a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without notes, he had no prepared words now. Everything he'd practiced in his head over the years scattered, useless. I didn't expect to hear from you, he said carefully. A bitter laugh slipped out of her. You didn't expect a lot of things, Adrian. The truth of it landed hard. I almost didn't call, she continued, voice steadier now, defensive. I didn't mean to, actually. It just happened. I'm glad it did, he said before he could stop himself. The words hung between them, exposed. Liana closed her eyes. You don't get to say that like it's simple. He leaned back against the counter, staring at the city lights he suddenly couldn't see. I know. Another pause. In the background, Adrian could hear the faint echo of hospital sounds, distant footsteps, a muted announcement. His chest tightened. Where are you? He asked. She hesitated. At work. At this hour? My mother's in the ICU, she said quietly. The floor seemed to tilt. I didn't know, Adrian said, and for once the words weren't an excuse. If I had. You didn't, she interrupted, sharper now. That's kind of the point, isn't it? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with everything they had never said. His love, her confusion, the years that had passed without explanation. I never stopped caring, he said, the admission costing him more than any public failure ever had. I just chose not to interfere with your life. Liana's hand curled into a fist at her side. You don't get credit for disappearing. I'm not asking for it. Her breath wavered. For a moment, the anger cracked, revealing something raw underneath. Then why now, Adrian? Why answer after all this time? He closed his eyes. Because hearing your voice reminded me that silence isn't neutral, he said. It's a decision, and I made it for too long. Tears burned behind her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She pressed her forehead against the cool concrete wall of the stairwell. I don't know what this is, she whispered. Neither do I, he admitted. But I know it matters. A nurse's voice echoed down the corridor, calling her name. Liana straightened, wiping at her eyes. I have to go, she said. I understand, Adrian replied, though understanding felt like a fragile thing. She hesitated. Adrian, yes. Don't disappear again. The plea in her voice struck deeper than accusation ever could. I won't, he said, and this time, it wasn't restraint speaking. It was resolve. The call ended. Adrian stood motionless, phone still pressed to his ear, heart pounding like it had something to prove. 10 years of silence had ended in 6 minutes and 42 seconds, and nothing about his life felt stable anymore. Across town, Liana slipped the phone into her pocket and walked back toward the ICU, emotions colliding in her chest. Anger, relief, fear, something dangerously close to hope. One call had done what a decade could not. It had reopened everything. If someone who once vanished suddenly explained themselves, would you listen, or would the hurt be too loud to hear the truth? The morning after the call arrived without mercy, Adrian Vale had slept less than 2 hours, not because his body refused rest, but because his mind would not let the moment settle. Every word replayed itself with surgical precision. Her voice, the pauses, the way she had said his name as if testing whether it still belonged to him. By dawn, the city below his windows was already alive, indifferent to the fact that his carefully ordered world had shifted off its axis. He stood in the shower longer than necessary, letting the heat beat against his shoulders, as if it could rinse away the vulnerability he had allowed to surface. It didn't. Vulnerability clung to him, unfamiliar and unwelcome. At the office, the boardroom filled with people who spoke in projections and forecasts, none of them aware that the man at the head of the table was fighting a quieter battle. Adrian listened, nodded, made decisions that moved millions of dollars. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, he was building walls again. This was a mistake, he told himself. Reopening the past never led anywhere good. Liana had her life. He had his. Whatever spark that call had ignited needed to be contained before it became a fire he couldn't control. Let's proceed, he said, voice calm measured. As planned. As planned had always been his refuge. Across the city, Liana Moore sat in a plastic chair outside the ICU, exhaustion weighing heavily on her bones. The night had stretched endlessly, monitors beeping, doctors speaking in hushed urgency, hope rising and falling in cruel increments. Her phone rested in her lap, screen dark. She hadn't heard from Adrian since the call. That should have been a relief. She told herself it was. She had enough to handle without reopening old wounds, without questioning why a man who had once vanished now thought he could step back into her life with a few careful words. And yet, every time her phone vibrated with an email or a message from work, her heart leapt before she could stop it. She hated that. Love, if that's what it had been, had taught her to expect absence, to prepare for disappointment before it arrived. Letting herself hope, even a little, felt reckless. When her phone finally buzzed again, her breath caught. Adrian, I hope your mother is stable today. That was all. No apology. No explanation. No emotional reach. Liana stared at the screen, jaw tight. Part of her appreciated the restraint. Another part of her wanted to throw the phone across the room. She typed a response, deleted it. Typed again. Liana, she is. Thank you. 2 words. Safe. Distant. Adrian read the message 3 times before locking his phone. He told himself it was enough. Concern expressed. Boundary respected. Anything more would risk reopening wounds he wasn't sure he had the right to touch. Still, the restraint felt hollow. That afternoon, his assistant mentioned a charity gala scheduled for the weekend, a hospital fundraiser. Adrian barely listened until he caught the name of the institution. St. Catherine's Medical Center. His hand stilled on the papers. Coincidence, he told himself. The city was large, but not infinite. It meant nothing. He agreed to attend anyway, filing the information away without examining why. Liana spent the day oscillating between her mother's bedside and the waiting area, mind looping back to the past despite her best efforts. Memories surfaced uninvited. Adrian standing quietly at the edge of a room, the way he always seemed to notice when she was overwhelmed, the steady presence she'd felt before he disappeared. She had assumed she'd imagined it. People didn't love you for 10 years in silence. That kind of devotion belonged in fiction, not real life. Real life was messier, louder, more selfish. When her colleague mentioned the upcoming fundraiser, Liana waved it off. I won't be there. You sure? The woman asked. Big donor. Media. It could help your department. Liana forced a smile. I'm sure. That evening, Adrian sat alone in his penthouse, tie discarded, city lights flickering like distant signals he refused to answer. He drafted an email he never sent, composed a message that said too much, then erased it. He told himself he was protecting them both. But protection had a cost. Across the city, Liana lay awake on her bed, ceiling fan rattling overhead, replaying the call in spite of herself. She told herself not to romanticize it. Words were easy. Presence was harder. He had already proven which one he chose when things became complicated. Still, when her phone buzzed late that night, she reached for it before her mind could intervene. A news alert. Not him. Disappointment settled quietly in her chest. Both of them were doing the same thing in different ways, stepping back, building distance, convincing themselves that restraint was wisdom. Neither was willing to admit the truth yet. Silence had already cost them 10 years, and it was trying to take more. When someone from your past reaches out, do you protect yourself by pulling away, or risk being hurt again by leaning in? Fate arrived wearing a badge and carrying a clipboard. Adrian Vale recognized the hospital before the car even slowed. St. Catherine's rose from the street in pale stone and glass, its emergency lights flickering despite the calm of the afternoon. He sat straighter without meaning to, an uneasy awareness settling in his chest. This is the place, his driver said. The foundation meeting's on the 7th floor. Adrian nodded, though his attention was already elsewhere. He hadn't planned for this, not consciously. He had agreed to the meeting because it made sense on paper. Donations, expansion, public goodwill. What he hadn't anticipated was how quickly logic dissolved the moment he stepped inside. The smell hit him first, antiseptic and something faintly metallic. Hospitals carried a specific weight, one he'd avoided since childhood. He followed the administrator down the hallway, polite, distant, until a familiar voice cut through the hum of the building. I just need 5 minutes with her. Adrian stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. He didn't have to. His body had already recognized her before his mind caught up. Liana stood near the nurse's station, hair pulled back, dark circles beneath her eyes she hadn't bothered to hide. She was speaking to a nurse, one hand pressed flat against the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She looked smaller than he remembered, and stronger. The administrator cleared his throat. Mr. Vale? Adrian forced himself to move, the sound of his shoes against the floor unnervingly loud. Liana glanced up at the noise, her gaze flicking over him once, twice, then stopping. The air shifted. For a moment, neither of them spoke. 10 years collapsed into a single suspended second. I didn't know you'd be here, she said finally, voice careful. I didn't know you worked here, he replied, equally guarded. Both statements were true. Neither addressed what mattered. The nurse interrupted, oblivious to the tension. Ms. Moore, you can go in now. 5 minutes. Liana nodded, then hesitated, eyes flicking back to Adrian. I'll be right back. He watched her disappear through the double doors, a strange mix of relief and disappointment settling in his chest. He turned back to the administrator, but the meeting suddenly felt irrelevant. I'll join you shortly, Adrian said. I need a moment. When Liana returned, her composure had slipped just enough to reveal the strain beneath. Her shoulders sagged as she exhaled, and she looked surprised when she found Adrian still there. You didn't have to wait, she said. I wanted to, he replied